Welcome to Let's Talk Memoir, a podcast for memoir lovers, readers, and writers. I'm your host, Ronit Plank. Let's Talk Memoir is also a Substack newsletter. About once a month, I publish memoir craft advice, answer questions about memoir writing, and share my latest classes and upcoming events. You can go to substack.com and subscribe to Let's Talk Memoir for free. You can also find me, Ronit, on Instagram and on Blue Sky. It's not too early to begin carving out some time for your memoir project this fall. If you've been thinking you might want an in-person writing workshop, my upcoming offering at the Larry McMurtry Center might be just the one for you. Writing dynamic memoir from lived experience to gripping story will be held from September 30th to October 4th in Archer City, Texas. By workshop's end, you will better understand memoir as a genre and how it differs from autobiography. You'll be able to identify and utilize the voice of both your narrator I and character I. You'll be able to strengthen tension and stakes in your memoir, create an outline of your memoir's narrative arc, hone in on what remains unsolved in you to deepen the resonance of your story. You'll be able to experiment with a variety of structures for your memoir project, develop plans for a writing life that nurtures both your creative and publishing goals, and begin to build community with other memoirists. Archer City will be our home for the 5 days, and fun facts about Archer City, it's the hometown of Larry McMurtry, the award-winning writer, and movies based on his novels The Last Picture Show and Texasville were filmed in Archer City. Angela Kinsey of The Office, who I used to do improvisation with in Los Angeles, is also from Archer City, and possibly even more important, there is a Dairy Queen there, and I would like to go there with you. So if this workshop is starting to sound appealing, you can check out the link for more information and registration in the show notes for this episode. You can also visit ronitplank.com and check out my events page. And if you have questions about what we'll be doing and whether or not this is a good fit, you can always message me via Substack or Instagram. And now, on to this week's episode. Today, my guest is Jenny Lisk, who is the founder of the Widowed Parent Institute. She's an award-winning author and widowed mom who is dedicated to helping widowed parents increase their family's well-being. Jenny's books, Future Widow and Widowed Parents Unite, and her show, the Widowed Parent Podcast, guide the journey of solo parenting after loss. Jenny's work has been featured in The Washington Post, Katie Couric Media, Yahoo Life, Parent Map, and more. She lives in Redmond, Washington with her 2 college-age kids. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Ronit. It's so great to be here. I'm a big fan of your show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you're here. And we got to meet in person several times at an event, and then we went to something recently, and it was fun to spend time with you. And you invited me to be the reader and the speaker at the inaugural salon you began in Redmond.
Yes, which was amazing. I knew you would be the perfect guest for that. And so thank you for saying yes and for doing an amazing job.
Oh, it was so lovely. And I love that evening. And I will leave room in the interview to talk a little bit about what you're doing there. I really want to do that. So to begin with, can you share a bit about Future Widow, losing my husband, saving my family, and finding my voice?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, it's a memoir, which is why we're talking today. And it takes place mostly during the 8 months that my now late husband was sick. And then also in the time after that, just a little bit of backstory on what happened. Life was just rolling along. We had an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and we each had jobs and the dog and the cat, and life was good. And all of a sudden, he was a little bit dizzy, which, dizzy, right? Who thinks that's going to be something? Well, next thing you know, he was a little bit confused. And I'm like, what's going on here? We go into primary care. Primary care says, let's do an MRI. He's like, yikes, you have a big old mass in your brain. You're going to the neurosurgeon tomorrow. Neurosurgeon says, we're doing surgery the following day. And that's kind of how we started 8 months then of terminal illness. It was glioblastoma, which I hadn't heard of, but it's a very aggressive brain cancer with a low single-digit survival rate. And it was a death sentence. And we spent 8 months of ER visits and surgeries and cerebral spinal fluid leaking out of his brain and all these things, ending with hospice at home. And then he died. And The kids were 9 and 11 by that point, and I had to figure out then what was next.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And
Thank
thank you
you.
for sharing that. When did you begin to understand that you would write this book? And can you talk a little bit about the structure for the book?
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to add what I said a moment ago. That was sort of the events of the story, but on a
Mhm.
deeper level, I would say it was just really about the main character, me. Memoir, as you know, is interesting because they have like character Jenny and narrator Jenny, right? So if the events are on the surface level, deeper down, it was about like character Jenny asking, does she have what it takes to help three out of the four of us survive this terminal illness? So that's sort of in terms of like a theme. How did I get the idea to write this? Well, when Dennis was sick, I started a Caring Bridge blog, which some of your listeners may be familiar with. It's essentially a website where anybody can start a free blog if somebody's having a crisis, medical crisis, to keep their friends and family updated on what's going on. And so I started this, and at first it was sort of just a logistical, like he's out of surgery kind of updates, right? And then pretty quickly it became sort of my vehicle for reflecting, sharing what was happening in terms of logistics, but also
Mhm.
then reflecting deeper. And when we both live in Seattle, the commute back and forth across I-90 from where I am to where Swedish Hospital is, right, is like, so I'm spending these hours, right, going back and forth thinking about what do I want to share with the people that are so important to us, that are supporting us. And the post became more and more reflective and kind of essay type things. And by the end of 8 months, I had 15,000 words of documenting in real time the journey of a young family going through a terminal illness. And so, for context, 15,000 words is a lot of words. It's not a whole book. The memoir in the end is about 55,000 words. So, just for comparison purposes. And people started saying to me, you should write a book, and I was interested in that idea. And they said, oh, you should just publish The Caring Bridge. It's well written and you could just publish it. And I said, I know there's value in this real-time portrait that I
Mhm.
captured, but it doesn't feel like a whole book. So, okay, great. But what then makes it a book, right? And that is where the interesting thing of memoir comes in. And this is why I'm so interested by what you're doing with your show and all the people you talk to and your writing and like really digging into memoir. Like what makes it a memoir, right? What moves it from a nonfiction account? It's not journalism, but like that, right? Just an account of what happened.
Yeah, the facts, the situation, the circumstances,
Yeah, and the events, right? And what moves it from that into a
the
memoir?
story into a journey, a search for self-discovery, a journey of transformation, a story of becoming, an evolution for the memoirist. We'll just call it, it's so hard to decide if it's a character or the narrator, but your evolution into this new version of yourself and how it happened.
Yeah. And one of the most interesting things that I discovered is memoir, even though it's true, it's not fiction. You can't just make up whatever you want to make up because it's convenient for the story. But it has to be told, like in terms of storytelling and story arc and character development and all the things that you find in fiction or movies, right? That are principles of storytelling. I was thinking, okay, well, how do I figure out how to tell this story in a way that incorporates the principles of storytelling? I knew if I just was like, this happened, this happened, this happened, the end, it'd be like, okay, well, that's nice, but like, why is
That's
anybody going
like
to read it?
reportage, really.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I had in the 15,000 words in Cambridge. But I didn't want to lose that because I felt like the view in real time into what was going on was an important piece of it. And so you asked about the structure. I decided to make the book in three parts. And the biggest part is that middle part. And that's basically the structure is all of those Cambridge entries with then the entry and then adding more when at 5 years later, right? Whether it's more context, more backstory, more what I wish I knew at that point. The stuff that I was struggling
Mhm.
with that maybe I wasn't sharing in Caring Bridge in real time. I shared a lot, but I didn't share everything in real time. And so as I went back then, I could add more. And as I had time then by then to learn and process, right? To flesh out the story really in the way of saying, like, here's the entry of what was happening on, I don't know, August 3rd or whatever. But now here's where I'm carrying the story arc of like telling you more about where this is going on and how it fits into the story.
Yeah, you can kind of almost speak to the you from before, which really is kind of what we're talking about when it comes to the reflection.
Yeah. So that's the middle part, right? And then the first part is kind of setting up the story, right? And it starts with, I think the first chapter is called The Day Life as We Knew It Ended, right? And it starts with him saying he felt a little dizzy. And that's part one. And then part three, though, this was the tricky part. So this is the like, how did I figure this out? As I was writing the manuscript and I went through and I was adding the stuff, all the reflections, and but then I was like, where does this end? Right? That was a really hard question. I'm like, okay, where does it end? Does it end the day he dies? Does it end today, the day I was writing? Does it end someplace in between? And if so, where?
That's a really hard choice.
Yeah. And I didn't know the answer to that. And I had a gut feeling, well, okay, it doesn't end when he dies because my story hasn't ended. It's not right to end it there. Ending it in the present day at the time I was writing it, maybe, but I didn't know if that was the right choice for the story arc. And so what I ended up doing, I had all the first and second parts basically all written, and they got more editing later, but those were all fleshed out. And then I stumbled down this rabbit hole and I found this book called The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. And yeah, it's a great book. Now, let me say, it's not for the faint of heart. It's like detailed, small print, tons of great detail. But basically, put the whole manuscript aside, and I read that book, and I took all these notes for listeners. He's a screenwriter, and his whole thing is about storytelling. And it turns out that the principle, like I said before, the principles of storytelling that apply in screenplays and in literature apply in memoir too. And so he broke it down, and I learned from that book the importance of the opening line. I had no idea that was an
Mm.
important
Oh, yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading this and I'm like, wait, 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 opening line. And he goes through and he talks about like in Pride and Prejudice, the opening line. In one line, the author encapsulates the themes of the story and
hmm
sets you up. And he goes through other examples like that in literature and stuff. But I probably spent like 10 hours staring at the ceiling, writing, quote unquote, right? And if listeners can see my air quotes here, writing the opening line by staring at the ceiling, like, what is one sentence that could encapsulate the themes and draw the reader in? Because before
Mhm.
that, my manuscript had some opening line. I don't know what it was, but it was like the way I might start a blog post. Just, it wasn't a bad line, but it wasn't a
Mhm.
good line,
It
right?
didn't hold a lot of weight. It
Yeah,
didn't do a lot of work.
exactly.
Yeah, and the first couple of paragraphs, the prologue, the first page or two of your chapter one, whatever that is, really does help set the reader up on this journey of self-discovery with you. It offers clues, it gives sort of foreshadowing of what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So that was super important. And then I learned, and then he talks about having like a mic drop closing scene, and he unpacks examples of that. And then the other thing is he dives really deep on character development. And like I was saying before, I mean, I couldn't invent a character, right? But by understanding the different kinds of characters he talks about. And so, of course, there's the main character, that's me. Then there's allies, right? People who are helping. Then there's opponents. And then he talks about like how there's fake ally opponents, like people that you think are allies, but they're really opponents, and fake opponent allies. And then there's the guide, like the Yoda character, right? Like in Star
Yeah.
Wars, right? Yoda is the guide, Luke is the main character, right? My mind was blown, right? And so I was really glad that I stumbled across this and put a pin in the manuscript work to read this. And then when I
Yeah.
was done with that, I said, okay, I know where the story ends. It has to have the story arc, right? And if I'm in the beginning asking throughout the time he's sick, and I'm like, how am I supposed to be a widowed parent? I don't know how to do this. I didn't sign up for this job. It's got to end where I have an aha, a breakthrough. I figure it out. And where I said mentioned before, how am I going to help the three of us survive? I could not help him survive. I could help him die well as a caregiver, as a spouse. Nothing I could do was going to change his terminal outcome. I did, though, have a lot of ability to make things better or worse for the other three of us. And so I realized I had to end the book where I finally learned stuff and my character growth is development is complete. So that was an interesting learning exercise and really made me appreciate memoir as such a fascinating genre because, like I
Yeah.
said, you can't make up a character.
No, it is really fascinating. And there are a lot of different ways to approach the story, from the closeness of the character and narrator, the way you manage time, the structure you choose, whether or not you incorporate research, whether or not you do it in kind of an experimental way. I mean, it's just endless. The more I learn about it, the
Yeah,
more I realize we have available to us, and that no memoir is the same because of all of
yeah,
these variables. And
yeah, for sure.
when you think about writing it, so this book really helped you, the Truby book. What were some of the more challenging aspects of getting the manuscript written and or ready to publish?
Well, that was a big one. The where does this story end? From a craft perspective, that was probably the biggest part. And then in terms of another big challenge I faced was as publication day got closer and closer, I was freaking out. This sense of vulnerability, right? Now, obviously, I know if you ask me academically, is memoir a vulnerable genre? Sure, it's a vulnerable genre. But it's one thing to like know that in your head, and it's another thing to be like on the verge of your book coming out and being like, oh wow, this is a vulnerable genre. Anybody would be like, duh, you didn't know that? Like, why'd you write a memoir? I knew it, but I didn't know it deep down, right? Of like feeling like, oh, this book is about to come out. I was freaking out. And I remember a discussion with my editor and my writing accountability buddy, and I'm like, I don't know if I can let this go through, right?
Well, what were you worried about in particular? Was it about how you've written about others? Was it about sharing personal experience? Was it about becoming more public? Do you know what your worries were centered on?
That's an interesting question. It wasn't about what I wrote about others because it didn't intentionally didn't do anything controversial in that respect. Maybe it was moving from being like more private to more quasi-public. And even though those 15,000 words in Cambridge had been out there before, the rest of the balance of the 55,000 had never been out there. I hadn't shared a lot of these things. And even there was one scene later in the book that I had not written about in Cambridge, but it was the time that he wanted to try to have sex. And
Yeah.
this was like, I don't know, 6 months into his being ill. And it was just, I mean, it was a disaster. And I added stuff about that in the book. And I was kind of like, oh, people are going to read this. And like my parents and my children and my colleagues and but it wasn't just that, but it was the whole thing.
Yeah,
And
it's a giant proposition, right? To decide to do something like this.
yeah, and wondering like, how are people going to react? Obviously, like the cover design process was so horrible. Cover designer made some designs, and people say, "Oh, you could put your designs on Facebook and ask for feedback or whatever." So I did that, and the three designs they gave me were so horrible, and everybody hated them. But to me, I was like, if everybody hates the cover this much, maybe they're going to hate the book,
Oh, so there
right?
was a lot to worry about.
Yeah,
Well, a lot of second guessing. I wasn't planning on asking you this, but what did you end up doing for your cover design?
I'm very happy with how it ended up.
Yeah, it
And
looks really
actually,
nice.
thank you. One of my author friends who's published multiple books called me up and she's like, okay, you cannot do any of those three that your designer gave you.
I can just imagine what they were. If the title is Future Widow, I can only just imagine the bad ideas.
Well, I had given them a bunch of criteria like no sad trees, no sad hands, no, right? Like all this stuff, but they just came up with just crap. And actually, I have a blog post on my website where I went through and I show the designs and what was bad about them. But anyway, my friend called me up and she was like, I'm going to help you brainstorm some concepts. Then you can go back to your designer and you could say, can we try something along these lines? And she saved me. But as far as just the feeling of vulnerability as publication got closer and closer, like I said, I talked to my editor, my writing accountability buddy. They kind of talked me off a ledge, but I was just this feeling of vulnerability. So I said, what can I do about this? And I said, when I think vulnerability, I think Brene Brown. And I'm like, maybe she's got something to say that'll help me
Oh,
out
she
here.
does.
Yeah. And so I got her audio book for Daring Greatly, and I just like binged the whole thing in one afternoon and got comfortable enough, just barely comfortable
Mhm.
enough with the notion of vulnerability that I'm like, okay, I can survive this. And then interestingly, once the book got out, this whole feeling was leading up to pub day. After the book was out in the world, somehow that just sort of dissipated. Now it's out, but it was the like, it's going to be coming out. That's where I
Yeah,
was
of
freaking out.
course, because it's your decision. It's in your hands. You could pull it if you wanted to. Nothing has been done yet, and then you make the decision. Well, it's been some years now since the book came out. So how do you feel about having shared your experience with the world, and what is it like now for you knowing the book and the story are in the world?
Yeah, well, I'm glad I did it. The vulnerability feeling has gone away. It's been about 5 years since it came out. It's been a good experience. The thing that I really kept asking myself when I was staring at the ceiling and tearing my hair out and like, why am I doing this anyway? Is this going to help anybody anyway? If I do all this work and if I'm vulnerable and if, right, is it really going to help anybody? And what I've seen now in the last 5 years is that it has, right? I mean, readers have said whether it was themselves having been widowed or better understanding grieving people in their lives or better understanding children's grief, understanding how to be a what I've come to call grief ally, how to support people. Readers just have told me lots and lots of times that it has been helpful, and that's why I wrote it. And so enough people have told me now that. And in fact, actually, I finally got that 1 star review with the nasty comments. And it was probably like 2, 3 years after it came out. Here, I wrote it down. She said, or a she, I don't know if it was a she, didn't go into depth about anything and very superficial recalling in a 1 star on Amazon. By the time that came in, there's so many comments saying the exact opposite of that. What I did was I screenshotted it and I posted it on social media, the bad review, the 1 star review with the comment. And I said, hey, friends, looks like I finally arrived. I'm a real writer now because look at this, scathing review. And tried to own it. And actually, as it turned out, everybody piled on in the comments, who's this person? They don't know what they're talking about, and made all these nice comments. And so it actually turned out to be a nice thing.
Oh, it's hard. Yeah, for sure. If you go and read reviews, they always say don't do it. But of course, I'm going to read my reviews for my
Yeah,
book. Of course, I am.
yeah.
Well, do you feel like reading that excerpt, since we're talking about the book and the contents of your book, I would love it for you to read the section that begins on page 157.
Sure. This is the beginning of a chapter. It's in part 2, so it's in the journal entry part. And the part that I'll be reading is one of the Bridge entries from September 8th, 2015. And the Bridge entry was called Memory/Memories. Tonight, as I cooked Pioneer pizza made in a cast iron skillet, I listened to a recording of my aunts and my dad singing and playing on guitar a number of old family favorites. It was a little slice of quasi-normalcy at a time when normalcy is elusive and highly prized. As I sang Charlie on the MTA along with them, I vividly recalled singing the same song this summer in my living room with a good dozen-plus people who had come to say the rosary and stayed to sing together. It was such a great memory. It got me thinking about all the other good memories I have of this summer. Don't get me wrong, I have plenty of other memories that are downright awful. I remember each person who has dropped off food, stayed to chat and connect. I remember teaching Peter to saute zucchini from the garden when he was practicing for his cooking merit badge. I remember picking up the kids from the lake and them begging to stay longer, to not get out of the water just yet. I remember the happiness of receiving cards and messages from people. I remember the late night chats with friends who stopped by after everyone was in bed. Speaking of everyone being in bed, I remember messing around on guitar into the wee hours of the morning. I remember Megan getting confident with using the stove and practicing her techniques for pancakes and assorted types of eggs. I remember so many positives in the midst of the most awful summer ever.
Thank you.
Of course.
What's it like to read from your work about this time? How does it feel? Is it hard to remember and to share with people who ask you to read excerpts?
The process of writing the manuscript and going through it 10 million times and obsessing over every word, and I guess what I'm saying is in the writing process, I encountered all the material over and over again so many times, which helped now, right? And some time has passed. But I do find that when I read it, and this is one of the things that I tell people, and then I have to remember to take my own advice, is like reread my own book at least once a year and reread it before any major interview, right?
That's so interesting. I was just interviewed and I read a section that I hadn't read in a really long time. And so I got to experience it brand new. And even the section I read, which from the prologue, which I've read a bunch when I do events, even that I found some new material in it that I hadn't really noticed. Not new material, but I understood something different about the story. It was really interesting to have been the architect of that work, but then to still be able to sort of look at it and analyze it in new ways.
Well, because you're a number of years now out from having
Yeah,
written it,
same,
right?
5 years.
Right. So you learn more things, and life
Yeah.
goes on, and
Yeah.
maybe things land differently. And so that's what I find too when I reread. I just reread it again for something. Oh, I need to do the audiobook soon too, so I'll need to reread the whole thing. But I find myself like some details that maybe have not faded, but aren't just popping up in my brain every day. Then when I read them in here, like, oh yeah, it kind of takes me right back into there. But you know what I did to kind of get over well, maybe the vulnerability thing and the fear? I had a chance to do an open mic during the pandemic, and it was on Zoom, unfortunately. And so I was like, what section am I going to read? I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do an open mic, I'm going to read that passage I told you about where my husband wanted to have sex.
Yes,
And
yes.
I was like, that's the one I'm going to do. But it was on Zoom. And so I was like, eh. But it just a few months ago, I finally had a chance to go to an open mic, an in-person one. And I was like, I'm going to go because I want a chance to read that, like stand up there in front of everybody and read it. And if I can read that out loud to a group, I can read any of it out loud to
Yes,
anybody.
yes. I'm really glad you picked that part. It's a little awkward. It's a little bit lighter, even though it's a story of such loss. And on that note, you've become a resource. You have a widowed parents podcast, you have Future Widow, and then you also have the book Widowed Parents Unite. And I wonder if you can reflect on the decision to launch the podcast and what your experience has been like being a resource for widowed parents.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I started the podcast because I felt like there was this gap. And this was way before I wrote the book. I started in the fall of 2018, and Dennis died in January of.
I didn't realize that the podcast was before the book.
Yeah, it was. So he died in January 2016. I was still employed at my former job, full-time tech job, but I was like, there's this gap in the space of widowed parenting. For myself, I found a therapist and I went to Camp Widow. I found resources. So I'm not saying it was easy, but I'm just saying like I found answers, stuff that would help, right? And there are, for children, there are grief centers. There's some terrific programs. National Alliance for Children's Grief has a place where you can look up, if you're in any community in the US, like what grief centers are near you with programs for kids and adults. But I wasn't finding the resources for me as a widowed parent where I was like, how am I supposed to do this job that I never asked for, that I didn't want, but now is thrust upon me, right? I had a 9-year-old and 11-year-old. I'm like, how does this not destroy them? What am I supposed to do as a parent? And so I wasn't finding answers. And I got the idea that I could look for answers by doing a podcast, that I could go out and interview people, whether they were grief experts, parenting experts, whether they were people who lost a parent themselves when they were young and now they've grown up and can share their reflections, whether they're other widowed parents who are seasoned who could share their advice and perspective, that I could go out and talk to all these people and learn for myself, but also learn for my listeners and kind of stand in their place on this side of the microphone, talk to all these people that they wouldn't be talking to, right? Because it's a lot of work, as you know, to do a podcast.
No, it's really easy.
Easy peasy, right? Yeah. So I'm like, on their behalf, I'll stand on this side of the microphone on behalf of all these widowed parents out there, because there's a lot of us, and ask questions of whoever's in front of me and draw out all the wisdom and advice and stuff and share it in the form of a podcast. And so I learned a tremendous amount. And I also built relationships with all these people that I interviewed, which I didn't realize that when I did write the book, people told me I needed endorsers. I was like, well, I have people to ask.
Yeah, I know. It's not like you planned it, but then it was there for you. And I feel the
Yeah.
same way that I never intended on being able to meet so many more people in the memoir writing community. I mean, I know it might sound funny. I wanted to learn more about their process writing the books, and
Yeah.
I wanted to dive deeper into memoir. But as an offshoot, as a byproduct of that, I got to meet and know so many incredibly supportive and generous writers. And that has been such a bonus of doing this project.
Oh, yeah. And you've had a lot of terrific guests on your show and who've had lots of interesting things to say. And
I mean, it is work. Podcasting is work. I guess we have to have the right temperament for it. And those of us who do, we just keep going.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, do you want to read that other excerpt that I chose? It's from later in the book, and I deliberately chose one that was a lot of your Caring Bridge journal, and now this is not Caring Bridge journal.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, starts on page 238. And so, like you said, this is in the third part of the book. So after that Carrying Bridge portion in the middle, where I'm asking, okay, now what? How do I move forward? What's next for me? So this chapter, it's at the beginning of this chapter called Early Steps Forward. After the initial flurry of activity, it was back to work and back to life. Or not back. There was no back to go to, only forward. We'd been through 8 months of hell. Now the rest of my life was staring me in the face, and the rest of the kids' lives, too. Since there was no going back to the way things were, my next best wish was that the three of us not become collateral damage to Dennis's cancer. The best medical professionals attacked his cancer, but, as I've said, glioblastoma is insidious. They couldn't fix it. This did not necessarily mean that we had to be destroyed, too. I was determined that this not be the case. The first months were, for me, filled with flashbacks. Every time I tried to concentrate on working from my home office, not 10 feet from my husband's urn, my mind would begin to wander. Generally, it wandered into flashbacks. It was like I had a VCR looping in my head. Can you tell I'm a child of the 80s? Scenes of the emergency room, of the surgery waiting area, of inpatient stays, of driving across the bridge to Swedish, of the hospital bed in our family room for so long. And of the funeral. This was the most recent, and there were so many scenes from the funeral playing on a looping tape in my head. Me standing at the front, giving my remarks, recalling who sat where, remembering their faces, processing in, recessing out, the school choir singing. So many flashbacks. What I didn't have were those waves of grief that people talk about. You know, the ones where all of a sudden you're fine and then grief washes over you like a wave. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. Isn't that what grief is supposed to feel like? The kids' grief counselor from Safe Crossings continued to visit our home after Dennis died. She and I got to know each other in the course of her working with the kids, as I asked questions about how to help them and such. One day, when I mentioned the flashbacks I'd been having, she said to me, "I think you might be an instrumental griever." What's that? It's someone who tends to process grief more cognitively than emotionally. Yes, that's me, 100%. I went straight to Amazon and searched for Instrumental Griever and ordered the one book that came up. It's a fascinating book called Grieving Beyond Gender, Understanding the Ways Men and Women Mourn. The main point is that grievers can be classified into intuitive grievers and instrumental grievers. Intuitive grievers are the ones who experience the waves of grief, and they process grief more emotionally. Instrumental grievers tend to process it more mentally, including playing scenes over and over in their heads. It's a continuum, so people can exhibit both tendencies in varying degrees. Here's the interesting part, though. Women tend to be intuitive grievers, and men tend to be instrumental grievers. But this is not always the case. There are men and women in each type. The tricky part is that society generally expects men and women to fall into certain types, and grief groups tend to be structured for the dominant grieving style of the gender. Finally, I understood why I kept turning down my friend's invitations to the monthly grief group at Swedish. She kept reaching out, which was very kind, and I kept saying, "No, I don't think so. I don't feel like it this month." Eventually, I asked, "So, what do they do at this group? Sit around and talk and cry?" "Well, yes," she said. "Yeah, I don't think that's going to be for me." Don't get me wrong, I love talking with people, and I cherish time with my widow friends, but somehow this group didn't seem quite right for me. I'm not sure why, and I'm sure it's quite helpful, even exactly the right approach for many people. As an instrumental griever, it just didn't seem like a good fit for me. Fortunately, I have found a group of widowed friends who live nearby. We get together at someone's house or we go out. The discussion is wide ranging, grief comes up, and so does laughter, work, parenting, and whatever else is on anyone's mind. I'm so lucky to have these ladies in my life.
Thank you. I had never heard about instrumental and intuitive grievers before,
Right? I hadn't
not
either.
until I read your book. Once you knew that, how did learning more about your personal approach to grief affect and impact you as you went through these years, these early years of being a widow?
It was a big aha. As I mentioned in the passage there, like I really felt like I was doing grief wrong, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody says you're supposed to have these grief waves.
This resonated with me because sometimes I wonder, I think I might be sort of instrumental.
I'll loan you the book. It's super interesting. It was like the biggest breakthrough because I'm like, I don't know, am I doing grief wrong? Like, and of course, there's no wrong, but when you hear everybody talking about waves of grief and you're like, I don't have waves of grief, well, and it turns out that instrumental grievers, the flashback thing. So if instrumental grievers process more cognitively, but it turns out flashbacks are a big symptom or indicator of that. So I'm sitting here having all these flashbacks, distracted from work and stuff, because every time I'm having flashbacks of walking down in the hospital and the ER and the funeral and all the things, right? And I'm like, wait a minute, that is grief. It's just a different way that it's experienced. It was mind blowing to me. And the book that I mentioned, it's not actually for lay people. It's like a book for therapists or something, like teaching practitioners about this grief style stuff. And actually, interestingly, I've been invited now to guest lecture at McGill University several times in one of the grad classes in social work. They have a class in grief and death and stuff, and I've been invited to come and talk specifically about this issue or this
Yeah.
topic because it is such an interesting and not well known thing.
Well, it's also no fun to think that you're not doing an emotion right. I think I get a little C3POE around things sometimes, and I think I could maybe think that that means I'm not a caring person, but it's just maybe the way I react.
Yeah, right. It very well
Yeah.
might be. And it's interesting. It's why you see a lot of men's reactions to grief. You will often see they'll do a project. A friend of mine's husband died, and like the close male relatives and friends and neighbors got together and like raised money and built a picnic shelter in the park with a plaque on it to honor. And it was like action oriented, right? And so, like, doing something, like that was them processing their grief. Right? And it's just that it shows up differently in different people. And I think
Yeah.
being aware that people can be grieving and they're not doing it wrong if they're not doing it the way you do it. If somebody else is doing it differently. It doesn't mean they're wrong or you're wrong. It just means they're processing it differently.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering, what you've learned. You published this book on your own and you created an imprint for it. Is that correct? And for your other book as well. And you have coached writers who would like to do the same. And I know you're super busy raising your kids and being a mom and taking the next step in your career and the podcast and all the things that you do. But you do help other writers and coach them. And so I'm curious about what your takeaway is about the publishing industry and what you might want to share with memoirists about getting their books into the world. I feel like you're in a really unique position.
I've learned a tremendous amount. I mean, I didn't really know. I was an IT person in the past, right? It's so fascinating. And you're right, I have been coaching people one-on-one who are interested in professionally self-publishing. And now I'm pivoting into doing this more in a group cohort kind of thing because I've actually started teaching this at one of the local colleges here, which has been really fun and rewarding to help people who want to publish their memoirs and want to do it themselves. And I came up with what I call Jenny's rules of thumb for nonfiction authors. And a lot of it applies to memoir authors too, which obviously is nonfiction, but it's different than other types of nonfiction.
You mean it's the best kind of nonfiction? No, I know you didn't say
Absolutely.
that.
One of them that I like to tell people is that your book is relevant as long as you treat it as such.
Mm.
Like a lot of people think, okay, well, my book is coming out next month or whatever. And then like after that month or that year, like nobody's going to hear about it anymore. No, that might be the case if you're writing a book about, I don't know, some tech thing that's moving fast and it's a nonfiction book in it, right? But like memoir, inherently, it's evergreen, right? I mean, your story, it's just not going to change. I mean, the messages, the themes, the connection with the humans, that doesn't change just because your book came out 1 year ago or
Yeah.
10 years ago, right? I mean, your book, your story, Ronit, is going to be just as relevant today as it was 5 years ago, as it will be 10 years from now, right? Because of the universal themes in it. But I find too many people think, okay, well, my book is a year old now, so I guess nobody's interested, so I may as well stop talking about it. And if you're bored and want to move on or whatever, okay. But if not, look, I did an interview on the Seattle New Day Northwest about my book and my topic, and it was like almost 2 years after the book came out. And look, here we're talking now, 5 years later, right, about my book. And a couple months ago, 5 years after your book came out, we were talking about your book in front of an audience. So
Hmm.
I really want people to understand that. And it's something that I've learned. And another thing that I've learned in working with and talking to lots of authors, other authors are not your competition. Even other authors who write similar books, and I would argue, especially other authors. There are a lot of authors who write widow memoirs. They're not my competition,
Yeah.
right? They're my peers, they're my friends. If somebody likes my book, they're probably going to like their book, and vice versa. It's not mutually exclusive.
There's room for everybody.
Everybody's story has their own elements, whether it's the actual facts or whether it's the reflections or the themes, like it's all unique. So definitely that's something I've learned through this process. And then another thing that I've learned is that if you're writing, you should be marketing. And a lot of people don't like to hear this, right? Because first of all, there's maybe a real narrow conception of what marketing is, right? They're like, well, how can I be marketing? Because I don't have a book to sell. So what would I put on social media? I can't put a post that says buy my book because there's no book. Okay, but that's not all there is to marketing, right? And when we were talking a few minutes ago about, like, you were asking me about my podcast, well, it turned out that years of talking about my topic in public, years of building relationships, years of supporting other authors, if you define marketing broadly, that's all under that umbrella. And it's not like I was doing it with some kind of like nefarious, So that's the kind of thing. Like early marketing doesn't look like, here's my book, you should buy it. But it's all the planting the seed, the talking about the topic, the building the relationships, the showing up in the world, all of that kind of pays off. And so I always tell people there's like a Chinese proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the best time was 50 years ago, but the second best time is today.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that because it's also very attainable. We can all think about ways that we can get the word out or hone our expertise, make connections even before the book is out. And once it's out, there's always ways to talk about it. And I do want to say, before I ask you the questions I always end my conversations with, do you want to just quickly share what Redmond Literary Arts is and why you began it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It is a local grassroots initiative to build the literary vibrancy, literary world on the east side here, specifically in Redmond. And it's got two pieces. So we mentioned that you were my first guest for my author salon, and that's a periodic event where I invite an author in to interview about their book and discuss it like a,
At the beautiful Redmond Library. And there were so
yes,
many people there, and they did
yeah.
beautiful marketing for it
Yeah, it
too.
was amazing. And the Redmond Library apparently is like the most active library
It's
in the King County
gorgeous.
library system.
It's
Yeah,
big,
it's
it's gorgeous. And then you did so much preparation. Oh my gosh, your questions were thorough and nuanced. You did such a beautiful job with that
well,
evening.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I was thrilled to partner with the library on it. It's structured like a rich discussion, right? Like
Yeah.
with me and the author, so in this case with you, and then with time at the end for then the audience to jump in and ask questions. And so that's the idea of that. And then the other main activity is the Author Circle, which is a monthly gathering at a coffee shop in downtown Redmond for authors and prospective authors and future wannabe authors who are interested in working on books, to meet and talk about what we're working on and just sort of build community here on the
Yeah.
east side among people interested.
Yeah. And you did that all, you just added that to your plate, but it sounds
Yeah,
like it's very fulfilling.
it is. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun.
Well, what advice would you like to share with writers working on their memoirs?
The thing that I'd like to pass along, which I feel really fortunate to have stumbled across early in my process, was this idea that memoir is an act of service. And I heard about this idea from Julie Lythcott-Hames, and she's an author and maybe best known for her parenting books and big parenting TED Talk, but also wrote a memoir herself about growing up Black and biracial in this country, and it's called Real American. It's a memoir. And so she's done a bunch of work in that space too, and I've heard her talking about how memoir is an act of service. I wrote it on a sticky note and I stuck it up here. Now, listeners can't see, I'm pointing on the wall above my computer. And every time I was like, why am I writing this book anyway? Maybe I should throw the whole thing in the proverbial trash. I looked at that note and I said, okay, memoir is an act of service. Like I'm keeping front of mind here the readers. How am I going to serve the readers? Because memoir, okay, on the one hand, it's about me, the author, but it can't just be about me because memoir shouldn't necessarily be just like a, I don't know, you might call it a navel gazing exercise, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that, shouldn't be that, right? Like just because it's about things that happen to me doesn't mean that I can't write it in a way that there's some kind of themes or resonance or that other people can see themselves in my experiences even if they didn't have the exact same experiences. And so for me, keeping that front of mind, and I would like encourage other memoirists to keep that in mind of like, who is going to read your book and how can you serve them by sharing your story? Because for me, if I wasn't going to be serving other people with it, it wasn't going to be worth it. And keeping that in mind kept me going.
Thank you so much. And you've mentioned a few books during our time together. Are there any other books? You've got the Truby book and this one by
Julie Lythcott-Hames.
yes, Julie Lythcott-Hames, which I'll include. Are there any other books that informed your writing process that you'd like to recommend?
Definitely the Truby book for sure. Hands down, that's always the first one I recommend. If anybody's going to self-publish or work with a hybrid publisher, I would recommend picking up a copy of the Chicago Manual of Style, which is like, I don't know, like 10 million pages long. Like I've got it sitting over here and it's probably like 5 inches thick or something. Because, I mean, obviously you're going to have an editor and they can help you with all the Chicago rules about your commas and your hyphens and your paragraphs. But I have found with a lot of the people I've worked with, Chicago Manual of Style, in addition to all the writing rules, has all the rules about like formatting and books and like how to make a book look like a real book. And there's stuff in there like where does page one start? And how are the headers and footers, the running heads with the page numbers and the what are the rules for that? And which pages get Roman numerals and which ones get regular numbers? And if you have a half title page, what does that do to the pagination? And how do the paragraphs supposed to be broken up? And it's tons of nuance. And I'm not saying that anybody has to become an expert necessarily. I mean, ideally, this is why if you're self-publishing, you hire experts to do your
We
layout for
hire
you.
you.
Well, yeah, right. But I can't tell you how many people I've seen, sadly, they've hired somebody who's supposed to know how to do layout and they're not following the rules of Chicago Manual of Style.
Yeah.
And even I've seen it with hybrid publishers. And I've had people tell me I hired a hybrid publisher because I didn't want to know these things. I want to trust that they know it. And a bunch of them know it. But I've seen too many cases where people, and then their book doesn't look
Yeah,
right.
professional. And
Right,
yeah, exactly.
exactly. And I think that you can, of course, break any rules you want. But when you're self-publishing, you can break any rules you want. Now, that doesn't mean you should. And I always tell people, if you're going to break one of the publishing conventions, make sure it's for a really good reason and don't break every convention. If you're self-published, you want to look as traditionally published as possible for credibility. And the more conventions you break, the less conventional you look and the more it damages your credibility. If you have to have a really good reason to break a very limited number of rules, okay, but do it knowing, right? And deliberately. I never want to see anybody break the rules accidentally because they didn't know, or their hybrid publisher that they're paying a lot of money to didn't know where to put the Roman numerals or whatever. Point being, long way of saying, if you buy a copy of Chicago Manual Style, you don't have to read the whole thing, but you could familiarize yourself. And actually on my website, I've got some kind of top mistakes I see people making, but just to kind of sanity check and be like, okay, my publisher's giving me this. Let me just kind of check it and make sure that it's right. Because ultimately, it's going to reflect on you and your credibility.
Thank you. So where can people find you, connect with your work, and get a copy of Future Widow?
Well, the book's available anywhere, of course, that books are sold, including actually it's in quite a few public libraries in the US. Check your library. And if it's not there, people may know. You can always ask your library to add any particular book to their collection. And then, of course, all the places you can buy books. And if anybody's interested specifically in grief resources, my podcast for widowed parents, or any kind of resources for widowed parents, widowedparentinstitute.com is where you would find all that stuff. And then in terms of the author stuff, I actually have quite a few resources on my other website, jennyliskllc.com resources. Like I was mentioning about top mistakes that I see authors make in their layout of their book or whatever. There's a bunch of stuff like that. Website, audit, free resources that people can find there.
That's great. I'll put those links in the show notes along with the books you recommended. And I'm curious how many people go and get the Chicago Manual of Style. I was kind of curious. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
It's
not
a
an
big
easy
one.
read. I gave it to myself for Christmas a few years ago, and it's turned out to be a good purchase.
Yeah, no, for you, for sure. Thank you so much for being my guest, and thank you for spending this time with me. It's always great to talk with you, Jenny.
Thank you, Ronit. This has been so great. I've been a big fan of your show for a long time. I've listened to, gosh, I'm not sure how many episodes. I'll have to go see who you've had on recently. So thank you. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Memoir. For more about my story and the project that started me on my memoir-loving path, you can check out my memoir, When She Comes Back, which is available wherever books are sold, and as an audiobook that I narrated. For more about this episode and my guest, please visit the links in the show notes. You can also find a complete catalog of Let's Talk Memoir episodes at ronitplank.com/Let's Talk Memoir. Let's Talk Memoir is also on Substack. About once a month, I publish memoir craft advice, additional interviews, and upcoming classes that I'm offering. There's no paywall. If you are a fan of Let's Talk Memoir, please feel free to share it with your friends. And if you feel moved to leave a podcast rating and review, I appreciate it very much. That helps more writers and readers find the show. Thank you so much for being here.